Well, actually, the Titanic was a cover for a top secret military operation I was doing. When we lost a nuclear submarine called the USS Scorpion, it was carrying nuclear weapons, so I needed a cover, and the Titanic was nearby.
Robert Ballard found the Titanic. That's the story everyone knows, but recently declassified footage reveals the real reason for his dive. We're told it was about history, but it was really a top-secret Cold War mission. The Titanic was just a cover story. What the Navy sent him to find was far more dangerous: 2 lost nuclear submarines, and the evidence he found at those wrecks, long withheld from the public, was the only reason he located the Titanic at all. What he was forced to keep secret is finally coming out. The Navy's sunken nightmares. On September 1st, 1985, the world woke up to a headline that seemed impossible. The RMS Titanic, the unsinkable ship that vanished beneath the waves 73 years earlier, had been found. The man of the hour was oceanographer Robert Ballard. He was hailed as a hero, a modern-day Magellan who had conquered the deep sea's most famous mystery. But here's the catch. That entire discovery, the one that made Ballard a legend, was built on a foundation of secrecy. The celebrated moment was actually the final act of a top-secret military operation. The search for the Titanic was a brilliant, masterfully executed cover story. What most people don't realize is that Ballard wasn't just an explorer, he was a commander in the U.S. Naval Reserve with deep ties to the military. And in the early 1980s, during the iciest days of the Cold War, the U.S. Navy had a massive problem. 2 of its most advanced nuclear submarines had been lost in the Atlantic under mysterious circumstances. These weren't just sunken vessels, they were floating nuclear hazards, and their technology was dangerously exposed. The first disaster struck on April 10, 1963. The USS Thresher, the most advanced attack submarine of its day, was conducting deep dive tests about 220 miles east of Cape Cod. On board were 129 sailors and civilian technicians. As the Thresher descended, the support ship Skylark on the surface received a garbled message. Minor difficulties, have positive up angle, attempting to blow. Then silence, followed by a sound picked up by hydrophones, the unmistakable, terrifying noise of a massive implosion. The sub had been crushed by the immense pressure at a depth of over 8,000 feet. The loss was staggering, the worst submarine disaster in history. The Navy was desperate for answers. A faulty pipe fitting, a catastrophic electrical failure. They needed to find the wreck to understand what went wrong, but at that depth it was nearly impossible. Then, just 5 years later, it happened again. In May 1968, the USS Scorpion, another nuclear-powered attack sub, was returning to Virginia from a patrol in the Mediterranean. It was carrying 99 men. Its last radio message was routine. Then it simply vanished. The Navy launched a massive secret search. For months, they found nothing. The sub was just gone. The crazy part is, the Navy was terrified. Was it a secret Soviet attack? Did the Scorpion's own torpedo arm itself and detonate inside the sub? Or did its nuclear reactor fail? Eventually, a Navy research ship picked up the acoustic signature of the Scorpion's implosion and located the wreckage scattered across the seabed more than 10,000 feet down, 400 miles southwest of the Azores. So, here's the deal. By the early 1980s, the Navy had $2 billion nuclear submarines and their reactors sitting on the ocean floor. They had 2 urgent questions. First, were those reactors leaking radioactive material into the Atlantic? Second, and even more terrifying, had the Soviets found them? The Scorpion was sitting in an open international patch of ocean. If the Soviets were poking around the wrecks, they could steal priceless nuclear technology and weapon secrets. The Navy had to go back. They needed to survey the wrecks, photograph them, and take environmental samples. But they couldn't just send a fleet of research vessels to 2 top-secret nuclear grave sites without tipping off the Russians and causing a global panic. They needed a perfect excuse. A plausible, public-facing reason to be scanning those exact patches of the deep ocean with the world's most advanced underwater technology. This is where Robert Ballard came in. Ballard had the world's most advanced underwater robotic vehicles, Argo and Jason. For years, he'd been dreaming of finding the Titanic, but he couldn't get the funding. It was seen as a frivolous, expensive stunt. So he made the Navy a pitch that was pure genius. He went to the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, Ronald Thunman. He basically said, "Fund my mission, I'll use my new robotic technology to find your submarines first. I will spend most of my expedition time secretly mapping and photographing the Thresher and Scorpion wrecks for you. Once that classified mission is done, just give me whatever time is left. Let me look for the Titanic." Ballard had calculated that the Titanic just so happened to be located geographically between the two lost submarine sites. It was the perfect smokescreen. If he found the Titanic, the media frenzy would be so enormous, so all-consuming, that no one would ever ask what else he was doing out there. It was a massive gamble. The Navy agreed. The mission was a go, but on one condition. The submarine search was the absolute priority. The Titanic was just a maybe, a side quest if he had time. What the public saw was a romantic quest for history. What was really happening was a high-stakes Cold War espionage mission. Ballard wasn't just chasing a ghost ship, he was shielding one of America's darkest nuclear secrets. But finding two small submarines in the vast Atlantic was harder than finding the Titanic. A new kind of explorer. To understand how Robert Ballard pulled off the discovery of the century, you have to understand the man himself. Long before the Titanic, he was a kid obsessed with the ocean, and that's putting it lightly. The funny thing is, he was born in landlocked Wichita, Kansas, about as far from an ocean as you can get in North America. But his life changed when his family moved to San Diego, California. He finally came face to face with the Pacific Ocean, a vast, mysterious world that would define his entire life. In the 1960s, everyone was looking up. Space was the final frontier, but Ballard looked the other way. Down. He knew a wild fact. More of our own planet's surface, the part covered by the deep ocean, was unexplored than the surface of the moon. While astronauts were planting flags in the lunar dust, Ballard wanted to be the first to see the bottom of the abyss. But Ballard wasn't just a dreamer, he was relentlessly ambitious. He earned degrees in geology and geophysics, but his real passion was technology. You see, in the 1960s and 70s, oceanography was still a pretty primitive science. Scientists mostly relied on crude methods, like dragging giant metal buckets called dredges across the ocean floor to blindly scoop up whatever was down there, or they would lower clunky cameras on a cable, snapping pictures of mud, hoping to accidentally see something interesting. Ballard thought this was ridiculous. He wanted to go there. He wanted to see the abyss, not through a blurry, random snapshot, but with his own eyes, or at least through the eyes of a robot. He became a pioneer in developing remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs. These were basically high-tech underwater drones built to withstand the crushing, bone-shattering pressure of the deep sea. At the depth of the Titanic, for example, the pressure is nearly 6,000 pounds per square inch. That's like having several full-size cars stacked on top of your thumbnail. Ballard spent years at the legendary Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts, building and perfecting his robotic explorers. He worked with a famous three-person submersible called Alvin. Alvin could take humans down, but it was risky, expensive, and could only stay down for a few hours. Ballard had a better idea: telepresence. Why send a human in a fragile can when you could send a robot and sit safely in a control room on the surface, seeing what the robot sees in real time? His big breakthrough came in 1977. While using Alvin, Ballard and his team discovered hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor near the Galapagos Rift. These were volcanic springs gushing superheated, black, toxic water from inside the Earth. And get this, clustered around these vents in total darkness was a thriving ecosystem of bizarre life forms. Giant tube worms, some over 6 feet long, with no mouth and no digestive system. Ghostly white crabs and massive clams, all living on chemicals from the vent, not sunlight. This discovery was huge. It completely rewrote biology textbooks. It proved for the first time that life could exist without energy from the sun. To put it mildly, it was a Nobel Prize-level achievement. But here's the deal: the public barely noticed. Hydrothermal vents were scientifically world-changing, but they weren't the Titanic. Ballard craved a discovery that would capture the world's imagination. He was part scientist, part showman. He knew that to get the millions of dollars in funding he needed for his expensive robotic toys, he needed to make a splash. And there was no bigger splash to be made than finding the Titanic. For years, people had tried and failed. The search area was huge, over 150 square miles of rugged, uncharted seabed. The technology just wasn't good enough, but Ballard believed his new, untested ROV system could do it. He had a two-part system. First was Argo, a 15-foot-long, 2-ton robotic sled that would be towed on a long cable from the mothership. Argo was packed with advanced side-scan sonar and high-powered video cameras. It was designed to mow the lawn, scanning a wide path of the ocean floor, sending live video up to the control room 24 hours a day. Tethered to Argo was Jason, a smaller, more nimble robot that could fly out and get close-up shots of anything interesting Argo spotted. It was a revolutionary idea, but nobody would pay for it. The quest for Titanic was seen as a historical folly, not serious science. This is where his other life came in. His naval career gave him the in he needed. He had the security clearance. He spoke their language. He wasn't just some long-haired academic. He was Commander Ballard. When he brought the Navy his top-secret proposal, they listened. They didn't just need a scientist. They needed a pioneer who had the tools and the grit to operate in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Ballard had both. The Navy wasn't just funding an oceanographer. They were investing in a man who had spent his entire life preparing for this one secret moment. He was ready to find their submarines and then claim his real prize. He had the tech and the cover story. Now he had to find the Navy's nuclear ghost, the classified survey. In 1984, Robert Ballard and his team set out on the research vessel Nor. The public and even most of the scientific community believed they were on a mission to test new robotic technology. Only a handful of people on board and a few admirals back at the Pentagon knew the truth. This was not a test. This was a classified operation. Their first target was the USS Thresher. The Navy knew its general location, but they had never seen a complete picture of the wreck site. The pressure at 8,400 feet was immense. When the Thresher imploded, it was with the force of a small tactical weapon. Ballard and his crew deployed Argo. For days, they sat in the darkened control room, staring at the grainy black and white video feed from 2 miles below. The mood was tense. This wasn't a historical adventure, it was a grim survey of a military disaster. Then Argo's cameras picked it up. It wasn't a submarine, it was a field of shredded metal. The Thresher hadn't just sunk, it had been annihilated. The main hull had shattered into thousands of pieces. The team meticulously mowed the lawn, mapping the entire site. They photographed the torn sections of the hull, the conning tower, and most importantly, the area around the shielded reactor compartment. Ballard's team gathered the environmental data the Navy desperately needed. Was it hot? Was it leaking? The data was classified, but the good news was that the reactor had held. It was stable. The mission was a success. But the real wow factor came at the next site, the USS Scorpion. The Scorpion was in even deeper water, over 10,000 feet down. Its loss was a total mystery. The Nor sailed to the coordinates, and once again Argo was sent down into the darkness. They found the Scorpion wreck. But unlike the Thresher, which was pulverized, the Scorpion was in 2 large, distinct pieces. The entire forward section, containing the torpedo room, was one piece. The aft section, with the reactor and engineering spaces, was another. They lay hundreds of yards apart on the seabed. Ballard spent weeks surveying the Scorpion site for the Navy. He wasn't just taking pictures, he was doing forensic science. And as he studied the footage, he noticed something incredible. The 2 main hull sections were the big prize, but leading away from them was a long, long trail of smaller items. As the sub broke apart and plunged to the bottom, it had left a breadcrumb trail. Heavier objects like engines and machinery were closer to the main wreck. Lighter objects like manuals, bits of insulation, and personal effects were carried farther by the current, creating a debris field that stretched for over 1.5 miles. This was the aha moment. This was the secret that would change history. What most people don't realize is that Ballard's entire Titanic strategy was born from this classified footage of the Scorpion. He realized that for decades, everyone looking for the Titanic had been looking for the hull. They were looking for a single massive object in a 150 square mile search box. It was a needle in a haystack. Ballard's new idea, learned from a naval tragedy, was to stop looking for the needle. He would look for the haystack. He theorized that the Titanic didn't sink intact. He believed it broke apart on the surface or just below it. As it sank for 2.5 miles, it would have shed thousands of objects: boilers, furniture, luggage, china, and all the rest. These objects would have been swept by the current, creating a massive debris field miles long with the heaviest pieces, the bow and stern, at the end of it. He wouldn't look for the ship. He would look for its ghost. With his secret mission for the Navy complete, Ballard had delivered the classified data. He confirmed the reactors were stable, and he provided chilling, high-resolution maps of America's sunken nuclear tombs. The Navy was satisfied. They held up their end of the bargain. Ballard was given the nore for the remainder of his expedition. The clock was now ticking. He had just 12 days left. His secret mission was done. He now had only 12 days to find the unfindable. Discovery in the dark. The Nore sailed to the Titanic's last known coordinates, a bleak, empty patch of the North Atlantic. The pressure was on. 12 days. That's all he had. After years of dreaming and a top-secret military bargain, it all came down to less than 2 weeks. The strategy was simple: mow the lawn. Using the debris field theory, Ballard and his team started towing Argo back and forth in a painstaking grid pattern, scanning the ocean floor. The team was split into watches, working around the clock. The control room was a small, dark, windowless container on the ship's deck. It was the only room with a view, as the crew called it, with monitors showing the live feed from Argo 2.5 miles below. Day 8. Morale was sinking fast. The crew was exhausted, staring at an endless, grainy, gray-green landscape of sediment. The Titanic search area was notoriously difficult. It was a submarine canyon filled with ridges and valleys. Argo even collided with the seafloor at one point, jarring the crew. They were losing hope. The 12 days were almost up. It looked like Ballard's massive gamble was going to fail. Then, in the early morning hours of September 1st, 1985, with only 4 days to spare, the watchstander saw something. It wasn't the ship. It was a piece of wreckage, just a small, dark shape. Then another. Then a distinct round object. "Wreckage!" someone shouted. The control room, moments before filled with sleepy, demoralized technicians, was suddenly wide awake. Hearts were pounding. Ballard, who had been in his bunk, was summoned. He ran to the control room. On the screen, Argo was gliding over a field of debris. Ballard's theory, the one he'd developed from the Scorpion footage, was correct. The breadcrumb trail was real. A jolt of electricity shot through the team. They weren't just searching anymore, they were following. They followed the trail of wreckage, which grew thicker. Then, a massive dark shape began to materialize out of the gloom. It was huge. It was round. It was one of the Titanic's enormous boilers. There was no doubt anymore. They had found it. The control room erupted, not in loud cheers, but in a kind of stunned, somber silence. They were staring at a ghost. The time on the monitor read just before 2 a.m. Ballard pointed to the clock. "That's when she sank," he said. The team realized they had found the Titanic at almost the exact time it had gone down, 73 years earlier. The sense of history, of tragedy, was overwhelming. They continued to guide Argo over the wreck, and then the most iconic image of all emerged from the darkness. The bow. It was sitting upright on the ocean floor, its railings eerily intact. The ship looked like a phantom vessel, sailing through an eternal, silent night. The team watched, mesmerized, as Argo's lights swept across the deck, illuminating the capstans, the anchor chains, and the gaping black hole where the grand staircase's elegant dome had once been. They had done the impossible. Robert Ballard had found the RMS Titanic. The world was about to change. But as the cameras continued to roll, they started to see things that they would be forced to keep secret. What they saw next was the true secret, the part withheld from the public. Who owns the wreck? The evidence withheld from the public wasn't just the classified military mission that got Robert Ballard there in the first place. That was the political secret, the cold, hard bargain he struck with the U.S. Navy. The real secret, the one that changed him, was what he found when he finally arrived at the bottom of the North Atlantic. The mission was a gamble, balanced on a knife edge of dwindling time and immense pressure. Ballard was using Argo, a revolutionary deep-sea sled packed with sonar and high-definition cameras towed on a 3-mile-long cable. For weeks they had mowed the lawn, dragging Argo back and forth over a massive search grid, staring at a monitor in a dark control room. The mood was bleak. The crew was exhausted, and the search was yielding nothing but endless, featureless mud. Then, in the early morning hours of September 1st, 1985, a shape materialized on the screen. It wasn't the ship. It was debris. A boiler. Just a single, massive boiler standing upright in the mud like a monument. Ballard knew in that instant they had found it. The ship must have broken apart, leaving a trail of wreckage. They followed the trail, and then she appeared. As Argo drifted silently over the wreck, the cameras captured more than just the ship's grand, decaying structure. The sheer scale was breathtaking. The bow was intact, planted firmly in the seabed, its giant anchors still in place. It was the ghost ship of legends made real. The cameras, an extension of their own eyes, swept across the deck. They saw the small human details. Unbroken portholes stared out like vacant eyes into the eternal darkness. In the blackness of the hull's interior, chandeliers, now rusted skeletons of their former crystal glory, were still visible, hanging upside down. And then they saw the shoes. Scattered across the vast debris field, lying in the soft mud between the two halves of the broken ship, were dozens upon dozens of pairs of leather shoes. They were perfectly, hauntingly preserved. The intense cold, the lack of oxygen, and the near-zero light had slowed decay to a crawl. But the real preservationist was chemistry. The tannic acids used in the leather-making process of the era made the shoes toxic to the deep-sea organisms that would have otherwise consumed them. They were tombstones. The deep ocean, in its cold, crushing indifference, had consumed everything else. The bodies, the bones, the clothing, all had been claimed by the abyss, eaten by microbes and small creatures over 7 long decades. All that remained were these small, empty leather shells lying exactly where the victims' bodies had come to rest. The team in the control room watched in stunned, reverent silence. They saw a pair of mother's shoes, elegant leather heels, lying just inches from a small child's pair. They saw sturdy work boots side by side. They saw fine leather dress shoes, polished for a first-class dinner, now resting in the mud. This is what Ballard had truly found. Not a treasure, not a prize, not a sunken prop from a history book. He had found a human graveyard. Right then, sitting in the dim glow of the monitors, Ballard made a decision that would define his legacy. He was a naval officer, he was a scientist. But in that moment, he was just a human being witnessing something profoundly sacred. He told his crew that they were the first people to see this site in 73 years. He reminded them that this was a place of rest for over 1,500 souls. It was their absolute duty to be respectful. He gave a direct order. They would not photograph or publicize these specific, heartbreaking remains. He felt it would be a grotesque invasion of privacy, a desecration. The world could see the ship, but it would be shielded from this, the rawest evidence of the loss. Before leaving the site, Ballard's crew conducted a small private memorial service. They piloted the Alvin submersible, the 3-man craft used for close-up inspection, to the ship's stern. There, its robotic arm gently placed a memorial plaque from the Explorers Club, officially marking the Titanic as a memorial. This is the part of the story that gets lost. Ballard's initial experience wasn't one of eureka, it wasn't a triumphant treasure hunt. It was one of profound sadness and overwhelming responsibility. He chose to edit the story for the public, showing them the majestic, haunting ghost ship, but shielding them from the raw, unbearable evidence of the human lives lost. When the news broke, it sparked a global phenomenon: Titanic mania. The world went insane for the lost ship. Ballard, the soft-spoken scientist, became an international celebrity. Overnight National Geographic, which had helped fund the public side of the expedition, put his story on its cover. Their television special, featuring the haunting footage Argo had captured, became one of the highest-rated documentaries in history. The public was captivated by the images Ballard did release: the ghostly bow, the telemotor on the bridge, the yawning void where the grand staircase had been. It was a perfect bloodless tragedy, a myth confirmed. But here's the deal. Ballard had opened Pandora's box, and he quickly and completely lost control of what came out. Ballard's position was firm, passionate, and unwavering. The Titanic was a memorial. It was a grave. It should be left entirely untouched, a deep-sea museum accessible only by cameras. He fought tirelessly, lobbying Congress and international bodies to pass agreements protecting the site from treasure hunters. But the lure of the wreck was too strong. The siren song of the unsinkable ship and its rumored riches was deafening. Almost immediately, other expeditions were launched, not for science, not for remembrance, but for profit salvage companies. Most notably, RMS Titanic Incorporated saw the Titanic not as a grave site, but as a sunken treasure chest filled with priceless artifacts. A bitter legal battle erupted over who, if anyone, owned the wreck. Ballard argued for its status as a memorial. The salvagers argued for the law of the sea, a maritime tradition of finders keepers for abandoned vessels. The courts eventually sided with the salvagers, granting them exclusive rights to retrieve items from the debris field. They began pulling up thousands of items: china plates, silverware, unopened bottles of wine, luggage, personal letters, and even a massive 17-ton section of the ship's hull, known as the Big Piece. Ballard was horrified. He publicly and repeatedly condemned these efforts as grave robbing. This sparked the bitter debate that rages to this day. Are the salvagers preserving history? Their argument is that the ship is disintegrating. Rusticles, metal-eating bacteria, are consuming the hull. They claim that by bringing these artifacts to the surface, they are saving them from certain destruction, stabilizing them, and allowing millions of people to see them in museums. Or are they desecrating a memorial for money? Ballard's camp and the descendants of many victims argue that you would never dig up the graves at Gettysburg to put the soldiers' belt buckles in a museum. The site itself is the artifact. The site is the memorial. To them, the traveling Titanic exhibitions, where people pay to see real objects from the ship, are a grotesque spectacle built on tragedy. Then, just as the debate reached its peak, Hollywood entered the fray. In 1997, director James Cameron, a deep-sea enthusiast and brilliant engineer in his own right, released his blockbuster movie Titanic. Cameron was obsessed. He conducted his own daring dives to the wreck, developing new camera technologies to film it. He ended up diving to the site more times than Ballard. He captured his own haunting real-life footage, and then he masterfully wove it into his film. The movie became a global cultural event unlike any other, shattering every box office record in existence. Its epic fictional story of Jack and Rose completely redefined the Titanic for a new generation. Suddenly, the historical event, the complex failure of technology, the hubris of the Gilded Age, the loss of 1,517 souls, wasn't just a naval tragedy, it was the dramatic romantic backdrop for one of the greatest love stories ever told. Ballard used a military secret to find a graveyard. Did the world honor it or exploit it? Let us know your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.